I've been working on Fijian museum collection from Fiji for 10 years now. And I'm just going to try to explain to you today the way I use museum collections in my research, and that is as primary sources, as important from my point of view as text or pictorial sources that date from the same period. And I'm going to explain to you why I use them that way and what that brings into my research. I'm going to mention, I just wanted to just tell you where Fiji is, for those who don't know. So Fiji is in the South Pacific Ocean. It's here. And it's very close to, can you see it? It's very close to Tonga and Samoa. I can't see anything, but yes. Okay. So I'm going to mention really 3 collections today. The first collection is the first collection I've been working on when I started this research 10 years ago, and it's the Dumont-Durie collection that was actually made during 2 voyages. The first one in 1827, so very, very early in terms of contacts between Fiji and Europeans. And the second one in 1838. And the 2 other collections, so that collection is kept at the Quai Branly Museum in Paris, where I was working last year. And this, the 2 other collections I'm going to mention today are here, kept by NMNH. And the first one is the Wilkes collections that was gathered in 1840 during a very extensive survey that the US exploring expedition conducted in Fiji at that time, with probably the biggest historical collection made in around that time. Well, certainly the biggest. And I worked quite a lot on that collection when I was a graduate fellow here in 2009. And the other collection is the collection I'm working on now, is the Brower collection. So Brower was a consul, a US consul in Fiji in the 1860s, and he was also a planter of cottons and sugar. And yes, so I'm going to use those as an example of what I do with collections. Okay, you've seen that. Okay, so I use museum items to inform early material culture from Fiji, but also early relations between Fijian islanders and Euro-American voyagers. And also, early museum collections tell me a lot about the status attributed to museum collections and museum, both in Europe or America and in the Pacific, and on cross-cultural dynamics at play in museum practices today. The other source that I use a lot in my research is contemporary ethnography, and I use it to understand cultural mechanisms at play in a number of contexts, especially in the way today Fijian people would exchange things and will circulate things. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. It's not that I think that there is a perfect continuity between the past and the present in Fiji, but I'm really interested in changes and what stayed, what remained from the earliest period I'm working on until today. And I'm especially interested in change of materials. So I just wanted to give you an example. The example is mats. So we are not sure actually that mats in Fiji were decorated with feathers very early on. But we know that feathers were used to decorate mats in Tonga and Samoa. And those mats were traded to Fiji. That is very interesting because actually the feathers came from Fiji. They came from, okay. So they mostly came, they mostly came from that part of Fiji here. And they were traded especially to Samoa by the way of Tonga. So it's a lot of exchange that allowed mat to be decorated in Samoa or in Fiji. I think I have, yes. Okay, so those two examples are in the Wilkes collection here. And the left one is a Fijian mat. And you can see that it's not decorated with feathers, but just with different patterns of weaving. And the other one is someone fine mat. And it's decorated with the feathers of the kula bird, the bird I just showed you. And that's a very important bird in Fiji, and the red feathers are very valued in the Pacific, in Polynesia, and especially in Tonga, Samoa, Fiji. Okay, and it's interesting because in the Wilkes collection we see that in Samoa and Tonga that were in contact with Europeans earlier than Fiji, very early artifacts already have different materials used to decorate the border of the mats. So those are two other Samoan mats in the Wilkes collection, and one is decorated with red wool, and the other one with a piece of dark navy blue cotton cloth. And today in Fiji, mats will be systematically decorated that way, so with a lot of wool on borders. The borders are obviously larger than they used to be. And I'm very interested in the way wool is used today in Fiji with what people are looking for. Obviously, a lot of colors, very bright colors, strong contrast. And that's also something you would find on the feathers. But obviously, the wool allows more decoration. Okay, and also interestingly, especially in eastern Fiji, this is very close to Tonga and Samoa, the most valued mat will still be decorated with feathers. I can see it here. This is the groom during a wedding I attended in 2010. Okay. So why do I use museum objects as primary sources? The first reason is because on the period I'm working, that's from the late 18th century to the late 19th century, virtually all written sources and all pictorial sources are produced by Europeans or Americans. There is no direct access to Fijian point of view. And of course, those sources will depict Fijian events and quote Fijian actors, but those are always mediated, so there's no direct access to the information. And even though those sources are very useful, they gather a lot of data, I think that they are not sufficient to gather the Fijian point of view. And the objects are different because, of course, most of them were produced, used and traded by Fijians. And so they provide information that you cannot find in written sources, for example. So I give you the example that gave me the idea to work on museum collections that way. It's two necklaces that are now in the Musée de Quai-Branly, and they were collected by Dumont d'Urville in 2000 and twice. In 1827, so very early. And those are, I don't have time to go into details, but those are highly valuable artifacts. They are made with several pearl shells that are very well, finely polished. The lower specimen is, the pearl shells are shaped like the turtle shells. Turtles are very important in Fiji. So, incredibly valuable artifacts that Dumont d'Urville must have received from a very high-ranking person in Fiji as a gift. Where it becomes very, very interesting is that Dumont d'Urville doesn't mention those necklaces in his account of the voyage. We know for sure that he collected them in Fiji because of that plate, where you can see here the very same artifact here on the top of the plate. But why would Dumont d'Urville not mention them? He's a very good observer. He gives a lot of descriptions. We also, from the account, we also don't know that there are actually 2 necklaces. They come together in the inventories. It's really clear that they are linked to that collection in museum records, and yeah, but Dumont d'Urville doesn't talk about them. So they tell me things about interactions people tried to have with him that he obviously didn't get, even though we know for sure that he encountered high-ranking people in Fiji, including those 2 chiefs, and he mentions them, and he mentions the relation he had with them, that they were very important informants for him. The right one is Lua, is a chief from Eastern Fiji, in direct linked, related to the most important chief in Eastern Fiji, so very important personage, character. And the other one is Tumbuanakoro, was a chief from Bao, the tiny island off the coast of Viti Levu, the main island of Fiji. So Bao is here, and the kingdom of Bao became the most important kingdom in Fiji during that period. So 2 very high-ranking individuals, and d'Urville talks about his relations with them. It's probably one of them that gave them those necklaces, and still he doesn't understand the value of the gift. So feel free to ask questions. I have plenty of info on those necklaces. Okay, the other examples are headdresses that are here at MSC. The top specimen, the 2 are the same artifact. This is an engraving from the Wilkes voyage, and this is the actual artifact in the Strait today. This is very interesting because we know for sure that Wilkes received that headdress from the Tuivakao, so the chief of Somosomo, where you have the kula bird and the red feathers. And again, so Wilkes mentions the headdress in the voyage, but he just said that it was among the curiosity I accepted. So nothing else. So he doesn't get how valuable this is. This is an object that was in contact with the head of a chief. So in Fiji, it's basically adorned with red feathers, made with white bark cloth, everything from the materiality of the artifact and the way it was used by a Fijian person and the way it was gifted to Wilkes by a high-ranking chief, everything tells me it's a very, very important artifact from a Fijian point of view. And still, Wilkes doesn't seem to get that. Where it becomes even more interesting is that the lower headdress is in the Brouwer collection. And on the Brouwer collection, I'm working on that now, but we have very little information on who exactly Brouwer was, where he was in Fiji, and what type of relations he had with people in Fiji. The fact that he has in his collection the only other headdress that I know in the world from Fiji tells me many things. First, that he was receiving high-ranking gifts too. That probably this headdress shares a lot of features with the Wilkes headdress in the way it's made and the materials it's made of. It also shows some similarities with headdresses from Tonga, with the Tonga and Rotuma, so the way it's spread like a fan. So that tells me that probably it comes from the same place as the Wilkes headdress, so here. So that's where I'm going to look when I go to Fiji next year. I'm going to look for traces of Brouwer in that area of Fiji. And this area is, belongs to the kingdom here where Wilkes collected their headdress, but is also very influenced by Tonga. So this is a good lead to follow for me. So yes, just to say, artifacts provide more information than written sources in many instances. Okay, the other very important thing in Fiji is that most if not all, early collections were given away willingly by Fijians. There were some violent interactions between Fijians and European people or American people, but very interestingly, those didn't produce museum collections. So, such violent events are always very well described in written sources. And what is also said most of the time is that you couldn't collect anything in that context. So I give you just one example. In 1838, Dumont d'Urville conducted a punitive expedition against the chiefdom of Viwa because he thought that the chief of Viwa was responsible for the death of a French sailor. And the chief of Viwa became aware of the French coming. He ran away with his people and with his valuables. So when they arrived, basically, there was nothing left to collect. And it's always the case. It's very systematic in Fiji. They didn't collect anything during violent event. The best way in Fiji at that time to collect things is always through proper exchange circumstances. And that's where Dumont d'Urville collected things, a lot of things. We know it from his log, that after the punitive expedition on Viwa, he went to Bao, so those two are very close. Okay, so Viwa is just a little bit closer to the coast, and Bao is here. And those two were, two chiefs were rivals. So the chief of Bao very nicely offered to keep the boats close to him and welcome the French party after the punitive expedition to celebrate the French victory. That was obviously his victory too. So they had a huge kava ceremony, which is the proper way of receiving guests in Fiji. And it is said in the journal that they collected a lot of valuable things at that time. Okay. This is also very close to the way in which things are circulated in Fiji today. Because the moment where you're going to see the most valuable artifacts in Fiji are during huge ceremonial exchanges. So just to give you an example, those pictures were taken by my PhD supervisor, Stephen Hooper, in 2005. For the Vakatarai Sulu, that's the end of the mourning period. It's a ceremony that happens 1 year after the death of anybody, but if it's the death of a very important chief, like it is here, it's a huge ceremony. And a lot of things, a lot of valuables are brought together and circulated among the guests. So basically, this was after the death of Ratumara, who was former prime minister in Fiji, president of Fiji, and is considered to be the founder of modern Fiji in many ways, and a chief in eastern Fiji related to Tonga too. So basically, that ceremony gathered every Tongan and Fijians in Lakemba. And so each island produces something. So there were a lot of things gathered, like wooden bowls, coconut oil. You see tons of mats, bar cloth, another bar cloth here, and highly prestigious items like those guys are wearing mats that are decorated with red feathers. Okay, and a lot of tambuas. Tambuas are ceremonial whale teeth, the teeth of the sperm whales. They are oiled and smoked sometimes, so they can have that very typical red patina. And they are considered in Fiji the most valuable things ever. So if you want to make the most prestigious gift possible, you will offer a tambua. And if it's a huge ceremony, you can gather quite a lot of them. This is a ceremonial unit that gather 100 tambuas. To give you an idea, in 2010, a tambua was worth about 500 Fijian dollars. That's more than 1 month of salary for most people in Fiji. So it's a really expensive article, but it's more than expensive. It's also a real symbol of, it's a token of respect. So you will give a tambua as a token of respect. The fact that it's whale ivory, it's also interesting because today, whale ivory is certainly considered the most important thing in Fiji. It was not always the case, and especially I think that in the past, pearl shells were used in the same way as tambuas today. And I have some information that seems to confirm that. It's interesting because whale ivory probably was valued for a very long time, but the availability of the material changed with the arrival of Europeans and Americans who traded a lot of those teeth from whalers. Okay, and just to give you, I just wanted to explain to you a little bit more what how Fijian today thinks about things circulating. Yeah. The thing I wanted to tell you with tambuas is that tambuas are the most valuable things in Fiji today, and very importantly, they are meant to circulate. This is their ultimate purpose, is circulation. Keeping a tambua has almost no interest. What they are important is for being gifted or being received. So a valuable thing in Fiji circulates today, and probably it was the same way for most things in the past. So again, I'm just going to give you 2 examples that I think summarize very well how Fijian people will think about things and things circulating, including valuable things. And that's, I think, very different than the way we think about things in Europe or America. And that's also, I love those 2 examples because, you know, when you're on the field, there's always a moment where something is not quite right, you don't understand something, and that's exactly the moment where you need to understand something. So let me, so the examples are linked to those 2 Fijian seniors. Here is Emosi. Emosi was the older man in my host family in Fiji. He's from Ovalau, but his mother is from Kandavu. Okay, so again the map. So Ovalau is here, where I did quite a lot of my field work, and Kandavu is here, it's the southern island. And the other guy is Sela Rayawa, is the librarian in the Fiji Museum. He's a high-ranking person, a very knowledgeable person, and he taught me a lot, including on circulating things. So the example with Emosi is that Emosi one day told me that he wanted to make a gift to his aunt, his maternal aunt from Kandavu. Because it's his mother's older sister, it's actually like an older mother for him in Fiji, in the classificatory system. So somebody very important to him. And she raised him for the first part of his life. So she's somebody very important to him, and so he wanted to give her something very valuable that she would love. And he asked her what she wanted, and she said she wanted a coffin to be buried properly when the time would come. So I was already, okay, coffin. So he said, okay, sure, and he bought a beautiful coffin, and he sent it to Kandavu. And a few weeks later, he visited her in Kandavu, and the coffin was nowhere to be found. So he asked, did the coffin arrive? And she said, yeah, sure. somebody needed it, so they borrowed it. And that's where I just like, what? And he laughed a lot. And he explained to me, he said, well, no, it's fine. They will give her another one. And I'm just like, you know, I can't follow. So she will be buried in another coffin. Yes, it's fine. It will still be the coffin I bought her. Okay, so see what's happening in here? Everything circulates in Fiji. Even the things that is the less circulating for a European like me. And so they will give her another coffin, but the materiality of the artifact doesn't count as much as the fact that it actually keeps its attachment to the person. It's still going to be the coffin originally that MOC bought for his aunt. It's still going to be a valuable artifact, only it will have circulated in the meantime and strengthen relations with communities in Canada. So I thought that was a quite good example, and actually she was obviously quite old, so I wonder if she's been buried in the coffin, MOC's coffin since. So I will find out next year. Okay, the other example, nope. The other example. So I wanted to make, I spent a lot of time at the Fiji Museum working there, and people were lovely with me. They taught me a lot. It's been a wonderful experience. And I wanted to make a gift to the Fiji Museum, so I bought this book. Was just out. It's a Fijian English dictionary, and I decided to buy it for the Fijian, for the library in the Fiji Museum. They were very happy with it. They put my name on it. It's written, it's in the library. It's written, donated by Stéphanie Leclerc-Caffarel, na. Everybody was happy. A few months after that, they did a little party before I left. And they made me a gift, and they offered me exactly the same book. And there, I'm just like, okay. So from my European point of view, it's kind of an annulation of my gift. But when then I thought about it a little bit more, they were actually very happy to give me that one. And they didn't seem like they were not happy with the gift in the first place, or that they just wanted to give me something I could use. They knew I've been trying to learn Fijians very hard, so they thought I love books, it is going to be really convenient for her, good gift. And when you think about it again, once you recovered from the surprise, those two books, the one that is in the Fiji library and the Fiji Museum's library and that I gave them, and this one, mine, that they gave me, they are more valuable than if they had been exchanged, because they carry the value of the gift. So it's just to explain to you how things circulate in Fiji and how this is important and how they are meant to circulate to create relationships. And I think it was quite the same in the past in Fiji. Very few things didn't circulate. So the things that didn't circulate or had a more restricted circulation are very important to me, and they are very special to me. I give you just one example. This is from the Wilkes collection. Well, the drawing is from the Wilkes collection. That breastplate that is made with one pearl shell is in the Wilkes collection, and Wilkes collected a lot of those. Apparently, very easily, one of his crew members says that people do not attach a lot of value to pearl shell, and they are easy to collect, which is obviously a very different a change in value in comparison with what I could gather from the Dumont d'Urville's voyage, for example. But in the same time, Wilkes also had a very systematic way of collecting things. A strategy, basically collected everything he could, and his men were instructed to do so as well. And they made that beautiful drawing of the chief of Mbao, so of the coast of Viti-Levu, wearing that breastplate. And here's the breastplate, and they didn't acquire it. They couldn't get it. But 35 years later, this artifact was given to the first governor of Fiji, the British governor of Fiji, when Fiji was a British colony, by the son of this man. So its value changed, and when, at one point, Vakambao, the son of this chief, was able to make a very prestigious gift to the governor of Fiji with that breastplate. So it's now in Cambridge, UK. The other thing with that breastplate that is very interesting is that we have an earlier mention of it in the journal of a merchant in the 1830s, so 5 to 10 years before Wilkes' time. And he says about pearl shells, pearl shells with the cross taken from their back are worn by them, Fijians. Some of these they consider very valuable, as they have been handed down from father to son for many generations. Old Snuff, so it's actually Tanoa Visavanka, they gave him that nickname, as one that has been handed down this way. It is broken and lashed together in many places. He always wears it upon his neck and takes great care of it. Why this is so interesting is that actually, yes, the artifact is broken in many places. The shell, it's been broken and lashed. There is a piece of turtle shell here. I told you turtles are very important in Fiji. But Osborne, the merchant, doesn't mention the ivory frame. So he mentioned, and again, Osborne is a very careful observer. He gives a lot of details in his journal. So why wouldn't he not mention the frame, the ivory frame, if it had existed? I doubt it. So probably it means that Tanoa Visawanka's breastplate evolved in time, and that it was a pearl shell, and it was framed in ivory later. So change in value. When ivory became more available and a very highly thing, it was added to the artifact. And Wilkes didn't acquire it. So it had a special value. And actually, Wilkes didn't acquire a lot of ivory. There are very few artifacts, including ivory, in the Wilkes collection. And again, Wilkes acquired everything he could. So just to say, this is really interesting. This is so in the 60s, 20 to 30 years later, that's in the Brower collection. It's a very interesting necklace. It's made with several waist teeth. They are pierced at both ends, which means that both ends, so probably reused from tambuas. So that's interesting. There is some white. So mangi mangi, it's the coconut senit for the cord, and then white bar cloth and red cotton cloth, all highly valued material in Fiji. And very early accounts say that Fijians are eager to collect red cloth to suspend whale's teeth, but we have no example in the collections until much later. So collection also tell me how value is changing and how Fijian gave things they wanted to give at different and could give at different time. Okay. So everything circulates in Fiji, especially valuable things. Now if we go back to those things now being museum items, that means no circulation at all, most of the time. And I think this is this is really about the Euro-American way of thinking about who owns what and how precious things needs to be kept very closely, and so in just completely different way as the way Fijian we think about a valuable thing. So those two are in France. They are national collections, which means they are completely unalienable. In France, something that belongs to a national museum cannot be given away or in any way, except for a very heavy process of changing their status, and then they can be sent back to their country of origin, for example. So in France, there are a lot of problems around repatriations and things like that. Here, obviously, the system is more flexible and repatriations are possible, and the museum especially is doing a good job promoting those. But when you think about it again, in terms of the way Fijian thinks about things, even repatriation is a really definitive step. It's a really definitive move, and it's always the same way of thinking about property in a very European way, because it's giving back. It's not circulating. So I don't say that repatriation is not important. It's very important. It makes a lot of sense in many cases, especially for things that were taken by force or that are very sensitive, like human remains and things like that. But it doesn't apply very well to the case of early Fijian collections that were given away willingly, probably in order to create relations with European sailors or further governors, etc. Yeah. Still, I think that Fijians are entitled to know that those collections exist and that they should have an access to them. So that's one part of what the thing I'm working on it, trying to provide access to things virtually in Fiji, but also ideally it would be good if some Fijian things could go to Fiji for maybe long-term loans or things like that. It would make a lot of sense in terms of the way things are meant to circulate and create relationships. And this is something that is happening quite more and more in museums now, to have long-term loans for very important things. So the very famous example at the moment are two Hawaiian artifacts that Adrian will know better than me. Those cloak, and I can't pronounce the Hawaiian name, and helmet were gifted to Captain Cook in the late 18th century, so willingly given away, and through a complicated history of museum artifact moving around, they ended up in the Te Papa Museum in New Zealand, and the Te Papa just sent them to Hawaii on a long-term loan of 100 years. So that's just okay. That's just the idea I wanted to bring today, just to think about how different conceptions of things and properties and circulation and relations make a huge difference in the way we conceive museum artifacts and the way we use them, and how that maybe could influence museum practices today. I'm just going to finish with a quote. This is from, so it's a missionary quoting exactly what I was saying at the beginning of this talk. Missionary quoting a chief from Somosomo, so northern Fiji, in 1839. And he said, well, Life says, he said, "This is a land of chiefs. It is our custom to give and not to sell. Give us our riches, your riches, sorry, and we will freely give you food. So just different conceptions of things and how things should be exchanged. Thank you.